Hi folks, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to talk about the Columbia Phonograph Company's secret weapon, Philip Morro. Now many of you will sit there and say, Philip who? Well, Philip Morro was a very important figure in the Columbia Phonograph Company, the Columbia Graphophone Company, whatever we want to call it. Now the interesting thing is this. Philip Morro was a lawyer, and I think many people who look into the history of Columbia, compared to Victor, compared to Edison, that Columbia did not always have the best products, did not always have the best recordings, but they sure had the best damn lawyers. They had one hell of a law department, and they were very, very pushy when it came to the law. Well, at least as they saw it. And so they had no greater ally than Philip Morro, because Philip Morro is the man who will totally change the industry. He totally changed the face of recorded sound in the end of the 19th and into the beginning of the 20th. So let's take a look at what he did. Now we all know that the first disc recordings were Berliner gramophone discs, and these were becoming extremely popular toward the end of the 19th century. Now, to say that the cylinder companies were worried about this is kind of a misnomer. They were somewhat hysterical. They didn't show it, but they were very upset about it. And they tried to kind of mess things up a little bit here and there. Of course, they brought lawsuits, Columbia especially. Now, one of the interesting things was this, that the director of advertising and marketing for the Berliner Gramophone Company was Frank Seaman, and he went into a deal with Emil Berliner in 1896. Now this deal was for a 15-year period, and it gave Seaman the right to buy the machines at a certain price, and then he would be in charge of sales and marketing and whatever, and he did a fantastic job. He was incredible. Now, as the fortunes of the company changed, Seaman, who was a brilliant marketer, said that, I made this deal with you when this was a fledgling company, and now we have grown tremendously. I think I deserve a better cut. Now, Berliner is somewhat stubborn. He kind of says a deal is a deal. And so Seaman goes on his way and continues his job, but behind the scenes he's already busy. Now, he had been battling off claims by Columbia. He had been battling off different lawsuits, and always standing up for the rights of the Berliner Gramophone. By late 1898, he's starting to sing a different tune. He will still come in support of the Berliner Gramophone at times, but behind the scenes he's starting to work on a whole different project called the Zonophone, which was basically a copy of the Berliner Gramophone for all intents and purposes. And the attacks continue from Columbia. Most of them pushed forward by Philip Morro. And, of course, everything starts to change when Philip Morro starts to look into things. And Philip Morro is clever. Philip Morro lived until the 1950s. I wonder if anyone interviewed him. I've looked to see. I couldn't find anything, because his story is a phenomenal one. Now, he looked at the Berliner gramophone system, and of course he discovered that there was a really loose interpretation of the infringement of a patent by the Bell-Tainter system, which was part of the Columbia Phonograph Company, Columbia Graphophone. And that was, there was a patent for a needle moved by a groove, which was a system for the floating stylus to be moved by a groove screw in the back of a cylinder machine. Now, Philip Morro, very clever, he looks at it and says, He gets a Berliner gramophone, he puts a needle in the sound box, puts a Berliner gramophone disc on the record, turns the machine on, lowers the needle, and by golly, it's moved by a groove. Now, with this very, very flimsy and really bizarre interpretation of a patent, Philip Morro is able to push for an injunction against the Berliner Gramophone Company and effectively making them impotent. At the same time, working in cahoots with Columbia, Frank Seaman finally tosses out the gamblet and says, yes, indeed, the Berliner Gramophone is infringing a Columbia patent. And he immediately opens the doorway to his new company, which he had already. This was not something that was just done in 1900. It had been going back to in late 1898 into 1899, where they were basically taking Berliner discs and wiping off the information and just putting out pirated Berliners. The thing is that he announces, yes, it's true. And it's over for Berliner. It is over. And Philip Morro did it. Incredible. He has taken down the most powerful disc company, which is basically the only disc company basically at the time. But you did have Zonophone just starting, and through support of Seaman and Edward Easton of the Columbia Phonograph Company, Zonophone is told, you're fine. And actually, Zonophone is kind of marketed by the Columbia Company for a while. Now, Columbia wanted to get into the disc market, but it had to deal with all the patents of Berliner. This was a big, big issue and a big problem. Well, Philip Morro comes to the rescue again. Now, a certain Joseph Jones, who had worked with Berliner, worked with Johnson for a while, had worked with everyone, and now was working with Columbia, was working on a patent for making wax disc records. Now, what I mean by that is recording onto wax, not recording onto an etched fatty substance into zinc. Now, he knew that Eldridge Johnson had been working on it for a while, and Johnson was told not to apply for a patent due to the possibilities that there could be issues of people infringing and copying what he was doing. Just keep it secret. Joseph Jones started to apply for that patent. It was rejected. Again, rejected. So Philip Morro takes Joseph Jones' patent, rewrites it, and makes it into something that he knows can offer no problem. And on December the 10th, 1901, the Jones patent is approved by the Patent Office. Philip Morro comes to the rescue again. And this is a big deal, the Jones patent. And there's a lot going on while the Jones patent is going on. Columbia wants to get into the disc market. It has nothing in the way of patents for discs. And so they kind of go on the QT and make what we call climax disc records that were made by a company that was invented by the Burt Company called the Globe Record Company in Millburn, New Jersey. Interestingly enough, at the same facility, they're making Zonophone records. So Zonophone and Climax are more or less together. And they are basically, how can I put it best, in bed together, more or less. And basically treated similarly with the same artists, same conductor for the band, and everything. Now, of course, it's a known secret what the Columbia Company is doing. But at this point, the Consolidated Talking Machine Company, and what was going to become the Victor Talking Machine Company by pooling the patents of Berliner and Johnson, and basically putting the work that Johnson had done and mixing it with the Berliner patents. They didn't have time to fight with this. They knew about it. And it isn't until after the Victor Talking Machine Company is founded officially on October the 3rd, 1901, that in January they do a raid. And the raid is basically taking all the stampers from the Globe Record Company. You see, after the passing of the Jones patent, the Columbia Company kind of took a break. They said, yahoo, we've got something. Well, they were also having trouble dealing with the Globe Record Company because of late payments. And Johnson took advantage of this. He went over and bought Globe for $10,000. And what he did, he took all of the stampers, brought them to a convenient location. Might have been New York, might have been Philadelphia. And each stamper was marked with the initials VTM, Victor Talking Machine. So every Climax record, manufactured for all intents illegally by Columbia, now is an advertisement for the Victor Talking Machine Company. Can you imagine the talk that was going on in the Columbia offices with Edward Easton and crew when this was discovered? Of course, there was a deal made out between Easton and Johnson actually behind the scenes. And, of course, there was something in Easton's favor. They had the Jones patent that was all pushed through by Philip Morro. And they said, hello, Mr. Johnson. We have the patent on making wax disc records, which you are making, and you are infringing our patent. So this is a real problem now, because for all intents and purposes, Columbia is producing an illegal product because it's infringing on the patents of Berliner and Johnson. Now also, Victor is producing an illegal product because it is making wax disc recorded records, infringing on the Columbia patent. What a mess. And so, of course, a deal is worked out. They pool their patents. They realize they can't defeat the other. One cannot exist without the other. And so, Philip Morro, who's involved with much of the deal here, he's in the pocket of Columbia, of course, changes everything. Think about what happens in the industry. We hardly ever give him much credit. Now, yes, there's a lot of chicanery going on with this fella. He's an interesting fella. But think about from the year from, like, let's say 1898 to 1902. How much the industry changed. And much of it is due to a certain individual by the name of Philip Morro.